very difficult not to piss off Ayn Rand followers.
Well, I think if you don't want to tick off people who share Ayn Rand's philosophy, the first thing you might do is not refer to them as quote-unquote followers. That's probably a good start, because I think right there you're implying an insult, which is to say that they are mindless, or that they are simply accepting as true everything that Ayn Rand ever said. And in fact, one of the things that Ayn Rand said again and again is, believe nothing I say until you prove it to yourself. Think for yourself is really the whole message of her philosophy. So it's not an appropriate criticism of people who know and agree with her philosophy to say that they are followers of Ayn Rand.
My opinion of her is that she is metaphysically naive. And, well, you know, a lot of objectivists would say, well, yeah, for good reason, because metaphysics are bullshit.
Whoa, where did you get the idea that Ayn Rand thought that metaphysics is bullshit? It's not the case that Ayn Rand thinks metaphysics is bullshit, or that she thought metaphysics are bullshit. Quite to the contrary, her entire philosophy is founded on a very specific and express and explicit metaphysical philosophy. It's laughably false, to be frank, that Ayn Rand rejected metaphysics as quote-unquote bullshit. In fact, it is the case that Ayn Rand's entire philosophy is grounded on metaphysics. She started from the bottom, she started with metaphysics, and she worked her way up. She did not get to her philosophy of selfishness as a starting point and then work down from there, or across from there, or up from there. She started with existence, with consciousness, with identity as axioms, and went from there. So it's just utterly false. There's nothing to say to your criticism about Ayn Rand's beliefs about metaphysics other than you are clearly and utterly misinformed on that, if you are informed at all. So pick up, you know, Galt's speech in her book Atlas Shrugged. I'm not sure if that was one of the ones that you said you had read.
I've read Fountainhead and Anthem.
Read Galt's speech in Atlas Shrugged, and you will see that Ayn Rand does, in fact, not only not reject metaphysics, but is very specific about metaphysics.
And Ayn Rand just doesn't want to deal with metaphysics because there's nothing objective about it.
It's not the case that she, you know, doesn't want to deal with metaphysics. She deals with it expressly and explicitly. She says that you must, in fact, found your entire philosophy on reality, and she expresses very plainly and very clearly what she means about her metaphysics, what her metaphysical beliefs are, and where she gets them. So it's just patently false. There's nothing more to say that than you have clearly not got it right when you say that she rejected metaphysics, or that she had no understanding of it, or that you know, she said it was bullshit, I think you said. That's just false.
One of her metaphysical assumptions is that the ego is a substantially real entity. The way I see it, my metaphysics, is that the ego is not the basis of my existence. In fact, it's a rather illusory, almost non-existent, other than, you know, nominally, than the names we give it and the uses we have for it in our language. It's not an entity. It exists nowhere in the world.
Ego simply means self. If you exist, your ego exists. If you're conscious, you exist. If you're conscious, your ego exists because you exist, and the word ego just means self. Rand's ethical philosophy is referred to as rational egoism because it focuses on the self. I think you're confusing egoism with egotism. You know, that practice of going around saying, I'm the greatest, let's just talk about me, let's talk about nobody else. that's a little bit of a different concept from egoism, which is simply the idea that in ethics that one's self is one's primary beneficiary, or should be one's primary beneficiary, as opposed to altruism, which is where the other people are meant to be the primary beneficiary.
Her ethics are totally based on the ego, and the idea that selfishness is beneficial, because if everybody just looks out for themselves, there's no confusion, there's no complexity, it's just simple, I look out for my own, you look out for your own, and we're all happy.
She didn't say if everybody just looks out for themselves, then there'll be no confusion, things will be simple. I mean, those things might be true, but that wasn't the point of her philosophy at all. You're effectively setting up straw man, things she didn't even say, and saying, well, those are clearly false. Well, she didn't say them in the first place. This is what happens. I know that yourself and Luke have been talking about Ayn Rand, but both of you seem, in Luke's case, he hasn't read any Ayn Rand, and in your case, clearly, if you have read some of the ideas in her books, you've gotten them way, way wrong.
Because basically, in her view, we're all just selfish animals who are concerned with our own self-interest always, and we shouldn't try to pretend like we're not.
Rand didn't say that we're all selfish animals and that since we're always selfish, we should stop pretending we're anything other than selfish. No, she said the real problem is that A, we're acting as animals, that B, are not selfish. In other words, she actually was saying that people are choosing not to be selfish, and that is the problem. They are acting in selfless ways. They are putting others first. They are sacrificing themselves to others, and they're expecting others to sacrifice themselves to themselves. Rand wasn't saying, hey, let's just be honest, we're all selfish. She was saying, let's just be moral, get selfish. Okay? It's something that, in Rand's view, you have to choose to do. It's a conscious choice to be selfish. It's not the case that everything you do, no matter what you choose, is a selfish act, because ultimately it's what you wanted to do anyway. That's not what Rand means by selfish. Nathaniel Branden has an essay in, I believe it's in The Virtue of Selfishness, in which he deals with, isn't everybody selfish? With that question, and I recommend you read that.
The ego is not, in my opinion, a stable basis for any kind of ethics.
It's not at all clear what you mean by stable basis. Stable basis for ethics, or egoism, or the ego being a stable basis for ethics. It sounds like you're trying to say something important. I have absolutely no idea what you mean, and I think that's because what you said doesn't have any meaning. If you mean something by that sentence, it's not clear what you mean, and it's certainly not the case that you're representing something that Rand said. Rand certainly didn't say that the ego is the basis for existence, or that the ego is the basis for morality. She said, in terms of her morality, that the standard by which things are determined to be values or non-values is the life of a man, in particular one's own life. She said that the purpose of one's existence is one's own happiness. She said that the way in which you pursue your values and pursue happiness is by the use of rational thought, by choosing to live a rational life. She did not say that the ego is the basis of existence, or that the ego is a stable basis for a theory of ethics. Maybe you want to elaborate, or maybe you could, for me, point out where she said such a thing. But to me, it just sounds like mumbo-jumbo.
Ethics, in my view, are only you can only have legitimate ethics when people get rid of this attachment to some ego, some illusory idea or image of themselves that I don't think is really exists or is substantial in any way.
If the ego doesn't exist, then the self doesn't exist. If your ego doesn't exist, you don't exist. Ego means self.
My ethics would be that, look, nobody has an ego, and therefore we should all be compassionate for one another.
Okay, again, if nobody has an ego, then nobody has a self. If nobody has a self, then no one is. That's simple. not existing, not having an ego, not being alive, not existing, all those things mean the same thing, cannot be a reason to be compassionate. I don't even see, even if not having an ego means something other than not existing, I still don't see how that means that compassion for others is somehow A, meaningful, or B, one's highest virtue.
Because none of us know who we are.
None of us know who we are? That's more a confession than a statement of fact or, a theory of philosophy. So take that with you. I'm quite certain that not everybody agrees with you on that.
None of us have a stable identity.
None of us has a stable identity? Well, those of us who aren't, changing into oxen or rocks and stones do have an identity.
All of us are suffering.
We aren't all suffering. Some of us are quite happy. Thank you very much. Again, I think that's more a confession on your own part than a thing that you have any evidence for.
And therefore, we're here together, and we should look out for one another. Look out for myself. Well, what if looking out for myself includes looking out for others? What if that is genuinely what motivates me and what makes me feel good, is being compassionate to others?
Now, you raise a good question here. What if, helping others, having compassion for others is done in a way that brings you maximum happiness? Well, Rand dealt with that. And you'd know that if you understood her philosophy. It's completely consistent with Rand's philosophy that you would, go without some money in your pocket in order to make your spouse happy. Because, again, that would be the furtherance of your own happiness. What Rand's talking about when she's saying no to, sacrificing of yourself is really sacrificing. In other words, putting something you personally believe to be less important ahead of something you believe to be more important. Putting something that's not as much a value to you ahead of something that is more a value to you. That's what Rand meant by selflessness. In Rand's philosophy, provided that you are choosing to see as values those things which help you to survive and to thrive, to pursue your own happiness, and if you would get more happiness out of giving your spouse a birthday present than out of buying yourself a toy or something else you like, if making them happy is a higher value to you in your own happiness than buying a new car, well then go nuts. Rand's whole point here is making yourself maximally happy. The point in her philosophy is don't trade something that is a greater value to you and your own happiness in exchange for something that is a lesser value to you and your own happiness. That's all. And what she's trying to address is that situation where others are saying, I know you'd really like to do A because A would make you survive better, would make you more happy, but even though you could choose A, you should choose B, the thing that actually benefits me more and benefits you less. The thing that makes you less happy and me more happy. She's saying, do not put other people before yourself if that means that you're sacrificing a higher value for a lower value or for a non-value. But if, helping others, in effect, is something that is trading a lower value for a higher value, if sitting around and watching TV doesn't give you as much happiness as building a treehouse for your kids, which is a sacrifice of your time and perhaps money, well, hey, go for it. That's not wrong. That's not sacrifice, because you're getting value in exchange for your effort that you wouldn't get by sitting around watching Geraldo on TV. Okay?
What else don't I like about Ayn Rand? That's it, I guess. And, I've read secondary sources referring to Ayn Rand. I just really don't have any appreciation for her philosophy. I'll just be honest.
Bottom line, read Rand. Don't read what people say about her. Don't read what, her enemies say about her. Simply to say, well, I heard, that, she thought that rationality was the basis for communism, and therefore I have to disagree. But I just heard it somewhere, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm right. Don't do that to yourself. You're undermining your own credibility. Read Rand if you want to comment on Rand. Read Aristotle if you want to criticize Aristotle. And here's the other thing. If you want to say that Rand's philosophy is flawed, criticize her philosophy. Don't criticize her. I'm not saying you've done that, but one of the things we see done over and over and over again is to say, well, because she smoked cigarettes, clearly her philosophy was flawed. No. Her philosophy is one thing, her conduct is another. And Rand, having discovered that cigarette smoking was making her ill, stopped smoking. You're a smart guy. Think independently. Read Rand. Judge what she said, not what others said about her. And if you have made certain judgments on the basis of what you have read from Rand, I can tell you, having read probably more, that you've got a lot of it wrong, and I'd say go back to the drawing board, because you're doing neither yourself nor others a favor when you get it wrong and provide a criticism of that which she did not say in the first place. Okay. Cheers.